Now that we're caught up from our day off, we will move on to some Kings offseason stuff. I was reading a couple of mock drafts today because that's kind of what you do this time of year.
Mm-hmm.
And the two players going to the Kings, one of them in an ESPN mock. ESPN actually did a 2-round mock where they draft a player from UNC named Harrison Ingram,
which is the most
just a perfect combination of names there.
Especially if you could trade for Brandon Ingram without giving up Harrison Barnes, and you had Brandon Ingram, Harrison Barnes,
and Harrison Ingram.
Oh, that would be a nightmare.
But the first round picks in a mock draft by ESPN and a mock draft by The Athletic, Sam Vecenie did a mock. I don't want to say coming around on the idea of the Kings using their draft pick, but I'm starting to see the case for these two guys specifically.
Okay.
When I've been kind of out, and it's not, like I said, I would still, if Monty McNair called right now at 916-909-1320, 916-909-1320, if you want to get in on the conversation, if he called right now and said, "Hey, should we use the pick or trade the pick? I've got this deal for a starting caliber wing on the table involving the 13th pick." It's like, yeah, then move it.
Mm-hmm.
But the first player in the ESPN draft going to the Kings is Ron Holland, G League Ignite, athletic wing, really good defender, versatile defender. Got to round out his offensive game a little bit, particularly as a shooter. But I think you can make a pretty decent case that the Kings are a good spot for him. Assuming a trade is not on the table. Again, I'm of the mind that the Kings should trade the pick instead of use it. But if there's not a trade out there, that makes sense for them, and Ron Holland falls to them at 13, I think that's a player where, hey, we think we can use him as a kind of do everything defender, switchable defender right away. He can play defensively in the NBA tomorrow. Now he has to round out his offensive game. He's got to figure that out. But I think the Kings would offer him a system and a space where he wouldn't necessarily need to be a shot creator and shot maker. He could hang out in the dunker spot. He could be a cutter, a slasher. You might have to knock down a corner three here and there, but it wouldn't be like a primary reason he's on the court.
Okay. So I like him as a prospect, right? And if the Kings were in a different position, or if the Kings could go out and acquire a couple of players right now to help them like fill up the rotation and really like take a big step. Let's just say that the Kings were able to go out and trade for, let's say, Kyle Kuzma.
Okay.
But in trading for Kyle Kuzma, they did not give up the 13th pick in the draft. I would be okay with Ron Holland in that situation because I think that in that situation, if you're going to have sort of a packed front court, he's 18 years old. And I don't know, like, again, we saw him at the G League level, and he played against grown men, and he averaged 19.5 points and 6.7 rebounds and 2.9 assists, right? All of those are impressive. His three-point shooting was all over the board, but like overall, you see the outline of, again, one of the guys I kind of compare like some of the game to is Kuminga. But he's young and he's raw, and he's not even at draft time. He won't even be 19. And the Kings, where they're at in their build, your asset as a number 13 pick versus how long it's going to take for him to get there is really difficult to weigh. And I'm sure somewhere they have an algorithm for this, right? They have this is who we project him to be, and this is how long we think it's going to get there. And this is what the 13th pick can get us, and this is what we think we can get.
Sure.
But it's tough to imagine him being like a good fit unless the Kings go out and get somebody who's a starting quality caliber player, because I don't want Ron Holland stepping on the court for a year. Really,
at all
at the NBA level, maybe 5 minutes a game here and there, but I would rather see him in the G League. He can come up and play 15 or 20 games over the course of the season, but I just don't think he's even close to where he's gonna be as a player. And we talked about the stats. Like, was he 6'6.5" without shoes? He's listed at like 6'7 3/4 on all the websites, but 6'10 3/4 wingspan. He posted a 38-inch max vert. Like, all of these things are really intriguing to me, and the fact that he wasn't a good defender at the G League level, but he was known as a crazy defender at the high school level, at like super aggressive. That to me is at least intriguing. And if you're gonna like really strip it down and say, okay, this is who you're gonna be. You're just gonna be a spot up shooter in the corner, a guy who gets out on a break and maybe scores, and a guy who maybe every once in a while gets a back cut or goes in, flies in for a rebound and dunks it. Like, if that's who he can be, but even still, like, I like him as that a year from now or 2 years from now. I don't know that I like him as that in year one, because I don't even know that he can be as reliable as Kessler Edwards in year one. And that's sort of where I'm at. Like, again, I like him, and he's one of the guys that jumps off the page. Like, if you watch his first year at the G League, hey, look, he went up against grown men and averaged 19.5 and almost 7. I like it. And the assist numbers, like almost 3 assists a game. Those all show me that he's got like a lot of potential.
Yeah.
But potential, when you're trying to get back to the playoffs, is like a 4-letter word. Like, it is. It's one of those, like, I want to see productivity. I don't want to see potential. And I believe that's also how the Kings that's usually their thought process. Like,
I'm stuck on potential as a 4-letter word.
Yeah, it's like bleep. Like, it doesn't mean anything. Potential means nothing.
Oh, okay. I had the wrong 4-letter word, but if it's a different one, okay, now it makes a little more sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
potential, it really does mean nothing.
Sure.
When you're a team who's trying to get to 2 years from now, that potential could become productivity. But for right now, you're still waiting on the potential of Keegan Murray, and you're sort of intrigued by the potential of Keon Ellis. And those are both young players that you're going to put a lot of stock into. And if you're a team who is good and trying to become great, it's okay to have 1 or 2 of those guys. What it's not okay is to have 3 or 4 or 5 of those guys, which is why we hear a lot of people saying the Kings are likely to trade this pick before they actually use it. I mean, I'll just give you, like, for example, Christian Brown and Watson, right? Peyton Watson for
the Nuggets.
They're the guys who they're like giving a little bit of a leash to. They're saying, okay, we're going to give you some of our minutes and you've got to earn whatever else. And a guy like Zeke Naji, who is kind of in that same bucket, doesn't really get those minutes. They're like, we're not that comfortable with 3 of them on the court at one time. We would rather have veterans on the court versus young players. And that's kind of where the Kings are. They're that same exact age range where most of your players are between 25 and 28. And that core needs support in the right way, like now.
Well, and that's why, like I said, if the Kings called and asked, should we use the pick or trade it, I'm advocating for trading it.
Of course.
But in the event that they're sitting there at 13 and one of these players falls to them, I think I see the vision with Ron Holland now more than I did a week ago or 2 weeks ago. That said, I think if Ron Holland is there at 13, I think there would be a team willing to move an asset to acquire that pick.
Oh, I agree with you. I think he's a player that somebody out there is going to fall in love with. And I'll just keep putting this name out there. Like, for me, Kuminga is one guy, but also Gerald Wallace is where the Kings got to a point where they had so many players that were already rotational players and really good players that they were able to go draft a guy like Gerald Wallace and just take a flyer on a kid. And eventually it worked out for Gerald because he got to learn the game from a bunch of pros. But he had to go somewhere else to actually get on the court. And that's going to be the tough thing.
A big thing for the Kings this year is something I mean, you have to add rotational pieces, and that's where trading the pick comes in. It's also where the Athletics mock draft, Sam Vicini, friend of the program, his pick makes a little more sense to me.
Okay.
Or even more sense to me, I should say. He has Rob Dillingham, the point guard from Kentucky, going to the Kings. And he mentions that this would, in the event that Malik Monk walks in free agency, a player like Dillingham would make a lot of sense. And that is the caveat to this. I think if you lose Malik Monk and you're trying to figure out a way to replace him, I would rather take Rob Dillingham, number 13 overall, and then go find a cheap, like, steady point guard who can, if Dillingham is a mess, I shouldn't say point guard, just a guard who can handle the basketball a little bit.
Okay.
If Dillingham is a mess and just cannot, it's like, oh my God, this guy is not an NBA player. He cannot figure it out. He's not going to figure it out this year. Then you have another guard who can step on the floor and be that guy. But man, I was doing a little research on Dillingham today, and I think he can play. He like really, really play and be a Malik Monk type of player. And it's not just because he wore number 0 at Kentucky. I think he's going to be really, really good, really, really quickly. And I think he could fill that Malik Monk role like almost perfectly.
I agree that he's that style of player for sure. Whether or not he can transition to the NBA and have instant success, I don't know. I think it does help him that at Kentucky he came off the bench. And so he is more like, that's sort of who he's been for at least the last year. But, well, that, and you mentioned Monk as a comparison. He actually, to me, he moves like Tyrese Maxey. It's funny because like Kentucky just like churns through these guys, right? He's a little blocky, like Maxey was coming out of college, and even like Emmanuel Quickly coming out of college, a little blocky. And that's not a bad thing. It's just that, he doesn't have like what Monk has, a swivel in the hips. Fox has a swivel in the hips. Like these guys really, really move laterally. And so I like him. I think he's going to be a good player. But again, at 19 and a half years old, and after 1 year of college, you're still worried about like, okay, how long is it going to take him to get there? And like, he can be fun and he can come in and he can average 8 points a game as a rookie. And like, oh, that was fun. Like that guy's going to be really good. But he's trying to replace a guy who averaged 15. And that's really tough. 15 and 5.
Sure.
And so that's where I kind of like get a little bit of a hold up, because I think you can go out there and maybe use a second round pick to go get a guy who could fit in and has a couple of years of experience in the league and might be able to like jump in and help you more than a rookie at this position. I don't hate that idea if you know you're going to lose Monk. The problem is the draft is on the 26th.
Right.
Free agency starts the 30th. You might not fully know if you're losing Monk or not by draft night.
Yeah.
I mean, the Kings probably have asked, like, could you know? Will you try your best to give us an answer before draft night?
Yeah.
So we can kind of plan accordingly. But that's the problem the Kings are in. They're in this really, really bad space where, just so people understand, they're already over the cap. They're at $150 million. I wrote on this that'll come out on the Kings beat later today. Like, they're at $150 million in cap space. They're already like $9 million over the cap. So if they lose Monk, they don't have whatever Monk made to go out and use.
Right.
They have their mid-level exception, which is $12.9 million, which can go get them a very good player. They might be able to get an equivalent or maybe a player that just plays a different position, but that can give you that.
Right.
So that's one thing, right? And then they also have trades and they have all these other things that they can do. But like, just the idea of losing Monk at this point would be pretty catastrophic, because we're talking about, there's a big difference between a $12 to $13 million player in the league and a $17 to $25 million player, which is who Malik Monk is at this point. And so trying to find that replacement, that perfect fit to change everything is going to be a lot more difficult. I would rather have Malik Monk and decide whether I'm going to go hard cap myself using the mid-level exception to go add another piece. But like, it's complex. And that's why we keep talking about like the puzzle that's in front of them is so complicated. And we don't know all the deals that have been offered to them or that they have offered to other teams. We also don't know how close somebody is to making a move with the Kings. It's very possible they already have like 2 deals lined up and they're going to like they'll be easy to move. We'll see it very quickly on draft day. We'll start hearing things like this is going to happen. This is going to happen. But you have to remember these things are fluid. And we went through this a couple of years ago when the Kings had Buddy Hield traded on draft night for Kyle Kuzma and Montrezl Harrell.
Mm-hmm.
They had him traded that morning, and then the Lakers went a different direction. They
that was crazy.
the Wizards swooped in and offered Russell Westbrook, and
that was nuts.
And things changed quickly.
That's something we've talked about before with Malik Monk, though. If they do lose him, finding the direct, hey, here's a player who averaged 15 and 5, and he's just going to be the next Malik Monk. It's not going to be super easy. And it might mean taking a flyer on a couple of veterans the same way Malik Monk was and say, hey, let's hope that they can develop in this role. I don't think it's going to be that straightforward where they go, oh, we lost Malik Monk. Okay, great. Now we'll just go get this player. And that's why I think if like, let's just say by draft night, they know Malik Monk is gone. He's like, hey, I'm getting word that I'm going to get $25 million from Orlando. And if that's the case, then I'm out.
Mm-hmm.
Then that's why I don't hate the idea of going and getting Rob Dillingham, because you can go sign a couple of I don't know, like I'm going to say mid-level veterans, not rotational players, rotational pieces is the word I was looking for. You could now go get a couple rotational pieces that I think can allow Dillingham to kind of come along, and maybe he's not Malik Monk this year, but in the aggregate, Dillingham with whatever those pieces are can kind of recreate that production.
No, I like your idea there. Again, I think when you're trying to build a team, there are all of these complexities, but I also think that when you get to draft night, the value of the 13th pick versus drafting it might just be too enticing for the Kings. And that's where, like, if you're looking at all of the Kings assets, they have the 13th pick in the 2024 draft, which they can trade on draft night, not officially, and he can't be officially traded until after the moratorium on July 6th. But you can trade him on draft night. We all know you'll draft a player for another team and you'll trade him, right? Well, like, the way that if you're going to make that move, you have to decide right then, like, is this player going to help me now, or is it going to help me down the road? And the other problem the Kings have is that the 25 and 26 picks are tied up. You can't do anything with them. And even the 27th pick is got to have like an asterisk next to it. So what you have to offer on draft night, if you're going to not trade the 2024 pick, the 13th pick in this year's draft, if you're not going to trade that, you're going to draft somebody. The best you can offer somebody is 2027, 2029, 2031. That's a long way away for some of these teams. Yeah. And some of these teams are like, look, we're not willing to wait that long to see what those picks look like. Maybe they are. Maybe there's a team that goes, oh, yeah, man, I'm going to take a 2029 pick from the Kings, because you're doing the math. Like, when is Fox, when is Sabonis going to start to slide? 2031. Heck yeah, I'll take that pick.
Yeah.
Right. But now you're projecting out like way far away. If you need something immediate, if you're hoping to start your build now, that's where the 13th pick has like a lot more value. A team like the Hawks might be starting over. A team like the Wizards are like in a bad spot and need to get better, right? But or they need to get worse to get better. They need to go get more picks. They need to go add another lottery pick. That's where I think the Kings will prey is on teams that are looking to take a step back to get better, and the 13th pick is a lot more enticing than a 27, a 29, or a 31 today.
How valuable would it be for the Kings to pick up a 2025 pick?
A 2025 pick is pretty valuable, because that, well, a 2026 pick is more valuable to them.
Why?
Because if you have a 2026 pick, that means that you can for sure trade your 2027, because you're guaranteed to have a 2026. Because as of right now, the Kings aren't guaranteed to have either a 25 or a 26.
So you could trade 26 and 27?
No, but you can trade 27 outright without having an asterisk next to it.
Oh, I see. Okay.
As of right now, if the Kings
that pick doesn't convey
yes
in 25 and goes to 26, isn't it second round picks?
No, in
26,
26, it's a first round pick. If that doesn't convey, it's top 10 protected. If it doesn't convey in 2026,
to the Hawks from the Herder trade,
it becomes the 2027 second rounder and a 2027 second rounder, 26 and 27 second rounders. So as of right now, the Kings can't trade their 2026 or 2027 second round picks because of that trade.
Got it.
But if somehow they don't make the playoffs the next 2 years and then they fall, again, it's top 10 protected. So if they fall outside of the top 10, and that pick does convey, then they can't trade the next year's pick.
I see.
Ahead of time. They can trade it on draft night, like what we're talking about right now.
But we're worried about future assets to make a deal now.
Yes, exactly. Future assets to make a deal
now.
So
it's not so on draft night, let's say they decide to trade back. We talked about that idea. And the reason I talk about picking players here is just trying to explore the space of possibilities on draft night. I think they're going to trade the pick. I don't think they're going to use it.
I agree.
So that's on the, but again, we're trying to explore all these different possibilities. So is it then, would it be, how am I trying to say this? Would it be valuable then to move back if it means picking up a 26 pick, because then it makes it easier in the trade market to go make a deal?
Yeah, if you could take your 2024 pick, the number 13 pick, and say slide back to the 24-25 spot in the draft, which is
Bobby Klintman range.
Yeah, same team has exactly. Same team has both of those picks.
Sure.
But stick with me. If you're able to trade back like 10, 12 spots and pick up a future 2026 first round pick, and that 2026 can be like some sort of weird protected pick, or it could be a pick that, let's say it's a Bucks pick, or it's a really good team's pick, and you're not expecting that to be a great pick. That doesn't matter. The fact if you can add a 2026 allows you to clearly trade your 2027, but also if you get to a point where, let's say you do convey your 2025 pick and you're not allowed to trade the consecutive picks, now you can, because you have two 2026 picks.
Sure.
And so now things and that matters, because if you've already traded your 2027, now you got 2026, like it gets a little dicey on what you can trade and what you can't trade.
Sure.
Because again, you wouldn't be able to trade a 2026 if you've already traded your 2027, unless you add a second pick. This is complicated.
Boy.
And that's why I keep saying, like, it's such a giant puzzle.
Right. There's not one straightforward, like, here's the very obvious, do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, because if you're Monty McNair, you have to say, okay, look, I don't like the value I'm getting for the 13th. Let's just say this plays out. He doesn't like the value that teams are offering for the 13th pick in this year's draft. But there is other value that you can get by still not drafting that pick. So if you don't like the value of the player that you might get, let's say you had your eyes set on somebody and he's not there anymore, right? And then you get to your pick and you're like, okay, I really don't want to take an 18, 19-year-old and roll the dice and see how they work out. It might be smart to move back, get a pick in this year's draft, and then a 2026 pick. So that opens up things down the road. But then also, that doesn't mean you can't trade your 2024, the pick that you get. You move back 8 picks or 10 picks. Somebody else is excited about a player that's there. You go, okay, it doesn't have the same value as a 13th pick, but a 2024 24th pick or 25th pick might have enough value to get you a player that you want.
Right.
And so that's how you might be able to kind of stack up your assets and start building something else. So it's complicated, but like, again, there's like probably 6 whiteboard scenarios that they have them all like in a room. Like, okay, if this happens, this happens. If this happens, this happens. You have to sit there at 13 and go, okay, I don't know if I want to trade 13, because what if a player we believe is the next Tyrese Halliburton falls to 13 and we scouted him, but we don't think it's going to happen. But then on draft night, it does happen. And you're like, okay, now we have to be fluid. We've got to be able to move.
Right.
So yeah, it's like being a GM would not, like, especially in the next week and a half, 2 weeks, like this is making or breaking someone's career.
Yes.
Like there's a good chance this will make or break the Kings portion of somebody's career.
Yeah. Man.
Tough.
And there's not, no. It's got to get better. That's it.
There it is.
The bottom line. However it shakes out, the roster has to look better going into this year than it did coming out of last year.